The morning came in gray. Not the dramatic kind of gray that announces a storm, just the flat, tired kind that sits over England in January like a held breath. The kind that makes everything feel slightly underwater. William stood at the window for a long time. He had his coffee. He didn't drink it. He just held it, watching the garden where the frost had come back overnight and laid itself over everything his children had touched yesterday, the football George had left out, the small muddy handprints on the garden wall from Charlotte climbing something she absolutely wasn't supposed to climb, the patch of lawn where Louis had simply sat down in the middle of a sentence and refused to get up because he'd spotted a beetle. He smiled at that last one despite himself. Then, he looked at his phone. The overnight update from the care team at the facility where Catherine was recovering. Comfortable night. Slight fatigue. Asking about the children. That last part. He set the coffee down. He hadn't planned to tell them today. He'd been managing it carefully, the way you manage a lit match in a wind, protecting the flame with both hands, turning your body against every gust. The children knew Mom was resting. Mom had had a procedure. Mom needed quiet and time and rest. These were the words they'd used, the small careful architecture of explanation he and the team had constructed together. But 3 nights ago, Charlotte had come to find him after lights out. She didn't say anything at first. Just appeared in the doorway of his study in her socks, her hair half unraveled from its plait, and stood there with an expression he recognized with a physical ache, because he had seen it before, in mirrors, in photographs, in a grief he had carried since he was 9 years old, and the world had rearranged itself around an absence. She looked like someone doing the maths. "Is Mummy sick?" she'd asked. Not the way children ask things, that light, passing curiosity that floats and dissolves. She asked it the way children ask when they already know the answer and are just waiting to see if you're brave enough to confirm it. He'd crossed the room and sat on the floor beside her. "Yes," he said. "But she's getting better. Every day, she's getting better." Charlotte had looked at him very seriously for a moment. "Can we see her?" He hadn't answered that night. He'd held her instead, and she'd let him, and that was its own kind of answer. He got them ready himself that morning. This was not a task that came naturally to him, he was honest enough to admit that, if only internally. George was manageable. At 11, George had developed a kind of stoic self-sufficiency that William found quietly heartbreaking in a way he couldn't fully name. Charlotte required negotiation. She had chosen an outfit 3 days ago and had apparently been waiting for the right occasion to deploy it, and this morning she emerged from her room fully assembled before William had even made it upstairs. Louis was a different operation entirely. Louis at 5 was pure momentum with no evident governor. He'd eaten breakfast with one shoe on and one shoe off. He'd narrated the entire process of locating the second shoe as though it were an expedition documentary. He'd asked, no fewer than 4 times, whether they could bring the beetle. "We can't bring the beetle, Bud." "Why not?" "Because the beetle lives here. The beetle could visit." "Beetles don't visit, they live places." "I visit places." "You are not a beetle." Louis considered this at length. "I could be a beetle." "You could not be a beetle." "Daddy." He looked up, and his face was so completely sincere that William nearly lost the thread of the argument. "What if the beetle misses me?" William crouched down, tied the second shoe, and looked his youngest child in the eye. "I think the beetle will manage." Louis looked unconvinced but dropped it. For about 40 seconds. Then, from the back seat of the car, "I just think we should have brought the beetle." The drive was quiet after that. George sat with his earphones half in, not listening to anything, William suspected, just using them as armor. Charlotte watched the passing countryside with an attention that looked like thinking. Louis fell asleep 17 minutes in with his cheek pressed against the window and his mouth slightly open, and William watched him in the rearview mirror at a red light and felt something in his chest that had no name. He'd been feeling a lot of nameless things lately. There is a particular loneliness that comes from being the person who holds everything together. He hadn't expected that, or maybe he had expected it intellectually, in the distant way you expect all the hard things before they arrive, but he hadn't known what it would feel like in the body. The constant small translations of reality into versions the children could carry. The nights of lying awake beside an empty side of the bed and running contingencies in his mind. The way every conversation with staff, with family, with George's headmaster, with Charlotte's teacher required him to inhabit some version of himself that was functional, present, capable. He was functional. He was present. He was capable. He was also, at very specific moments, like now, watching his son sleep against a car window in the flat January gray about 4 millimeters from the edge of something he wouldn't let himself look at directly. Catherine had called him 2 nights ago. Not about the medical updates, not about logistics. She just called and said, "How are you actually doing?" Not a question. The way she said it. He'd laughed. It came out strange. "I'm fine." She'd let the silence go long enough that it became a different kind of sentence. "Then," she said, quietly, "bring them Thursday." It wasn't Thursday yet. It was Wednesday. He'd looked at the update this morning, asking about the children, and gotten them all in the car a day early, and he was not going to examine it too closely. Charlotte spoke first, about 40 minutes in. "Is she going to look different?" He kept his eyes on the road. "A little, maybe. She'll be tired. She might have some bandaging." "Will she be in a bed?" "Yes." "Will there be machines?" He thought about this honestly. "Probably some monitoring. Nothing scary. More like they're just keeping an eye on things." Charlotte absorbed this. "Then, I made her something." "I know. She's going to love it." "I don't know if it's good enough." William glanced at her in the mirror. She was looking out the window, her jaw set in a way that he had to work very hard not to show that he recognized it. It was Catherine's jaw. The way Catherine looked when she was being stoic about something that was costing her enormously. "Charlotte." She looked at him in the mirror. "She would love a piece of paper with your name on it. She would love a single stone from the garden. She has been asking about you every day. Whatever you made, it's already perfect." Charlotte looked away again. But her jaw unclenched. George, earphones still half in, said quietly, "I wrote her something too." He hadn't mentioned this before. William felt something shift in his ribcage. "Yeah? It's not very long." "That's okay. I didn't really know what to say, so I just wrote the things that happened. Since she's been gone. Like a list. So she didn't miss them." William was quiet for a moment. "That's really good, George," he said. "That's really, really good." In the back, Louis slept on, cheek pressed to glass, utterly untroubled, one hand loosely fisted around nothing. The gray road unrolled ahead of them. And William drove. She heard them before she saw them. Louis first, of course, Louis first, his voice carrying down the corridor in that particular register that existed somewhere between speaking and performing, narrating something to someone, the words indistinct through the door but the energy of them unmistakable. Then, Charlotte's voice, lower, more careful. Then, William saying something very quietly, the tone that meant please keep it gentle in here. Catherine's hands moved to her lap. She had been awake since 5. Not from pain, the pain had gentled into something more like a deep, territorial ache, the kind that reminded her it was there without shouting. She'd been awake because she'd done the particular maths of January mornings and calculated that it was probably 8 degrees outside and George would have wanted his thick socks and probably hadn't thought about it, and William was good at an extraordinary number of things, but the thick socks problem was one that historically fell through the gaps, and she'd lain there in the facility's particular brand of quiet, that over-conditioned, faintly antiseptic quiet that is nothing like any quiet in a real home, and worried about socks for 40 minutes. She was aware this was not a rational response to a surgical recovery. She was also aware it was exactly the kind of irrational response that meant she was, underneath everything, still herself. The door opened. Louis came in at speed. He stopped about 2 feet from the bed and looked at her with enormous, searching eyes, this sudden, total attention that he almost never gave anything for longer than 4 seconds, but, when he gave it, it landed like a searchlight. He looked at her for a very long time. Then, he said, with the gravity of a small head of state, "You have a lot of wires." "I know," she said. Her voice came out rougher than she wanted. "Not as many as last week, though." He considered the remaining wires with an expression of professional assessment. "Are they putting things in or taking things out?" "A bit of both." He nodded slowly, apparently satisfied with this answer, then climbed onto the chair beside her bed without being invited. No preamble, no negotiation, just the confident territorial occupation of space that was entirely, specifically Lewis, and settled himself there like he'd been sitting there all along. "I found a beetle," he said conversationally. "Did you?" "In the garden. I wanted to bring it." "I'm glad you didn't." Daddy said the same thing. He thought about this. The beetle might be lonely. Beetles are quite self-sufficient, I think. That's also what Daddy said. She laughed. It hurt, low in her abdomen, a sharp tug that made her breath catch, and Lewis's eyes went wide and William was already moving from the doorway, hand half raised, but she waved him back. "I'm okay. I just laughing pulls a bit." "Sorry," Lewis said, looking genuinely stricken. "Don't you dare apologize for making me laugh." He looked at her. Then, very carefully, like he was placing something fragile, "I missed you." The room went very quiet. Not the facility quiet, the real kind. "I missed you too, Bug," she said. "Every single day." Charlotte had stayed near the door. William watched her. He'd been watching all of them, running the parental monitoring system that never fully powered down, and he could see her doing what Charlotte did when she was managing something large. The small contained breathing. The hands that had found each other and were holding quietly at her front. The eyes that were taking in every detail of the room, the monitors, the four-line, the particular pallor of Catherine's skin under the overhead light, a hospital blanket that was not their blanket from home. Catherine saw her. She didn't say anything for a moment. Just looked at her daughter from across the room with an expression that William had to look away from, not because it was hard to see, but because it felt like something he wasn't supposed to witness. Something between mother and daughter that was older than language. "Come here," Catherine said softly. Charlotte crossed the room in 3 careful steps and sat on the edge of the bed on the good side, William noticed, the side with fewer attachments, the side where Catherine could reach her without turning, and Catherine put her arm around her daughter's shoulders, and Charlotte leaned in, and, for a long moment neither of them moved. Then, Charlotte said, muffled slightly into her mother's shoulder, "I brought you something." "I heard. Daddy said you'd like it." Daddy was right. Charlotte sat up and pulled from her jacket pocket a small folded piece of paper, folded extremely precisely, the way Charlotte folded things, with an almost aggressive attention to alignment. She smoothed it once before handing it over. Catherine unfolded it slowly. William didn't look at what was on it. It wasn't his to see. He watched Catherine's face instead, watched her read it, watched the careful stillness she maintained, watched the single blink that was not quite fast enough. "This is beautiful," Catherine said. "It's just drawings." "It's beautiful, Charlotte." Charlotte studied the blanket. "I didn't know what else to do." "This," Catherine said, "is exactly what I needed." George had stayed in the doorway the longest. This was not hesitation. William knew the difference now, had learned it slowly over years of watching his eldest navigate a world that asked enormous things of him simply by placing him in it. George didn't hesitate. He prepared. He stood in doorways and corridors and at the edges of rooms and assembled himself into the version of himself that could walk through them. He was 11. He'd been doing this since he was 4. William moved to stand beside him. He didn't say anything. Just stood there, shoulder close to his son's shoulder, and they watched Lewis explain the beetle situation in full to Catherine, who was listening with the whole of her attention the way she always listened to Lewis, like his beetle was the most important beetle in England. Which, to be fair, it clearly was to him. "She looks okay," George said quietly. "She's going to be okay," William said. This was the hard bit. "We're through the hard bit." George was quiet for a moment. Is the hard bit actually over, or are you saying that so I don't worry? William looked at his son. 11 years old. Looking back at him with those eyes. He thought about lying. He thought about the careful architecture of reassurance he'd been constructing for weeks. Then, he thought about Charlotte in the doorway 3 nights ago, doing the maths, asking if Mummy was sick. The really hard bit is over, he said. There's still some recovery. It'll still be a few more weeks. But, the part one was most scared about, that part is done. George absorbed this with the focused attention of someone filing information correctly. Were you scared? He asked. Yes. You didn't look scared. I know. George looked back at his mother, who had now managed to get Louis to be quiet for approximately 23 seconds by the simple technique of holding his hand. I wrote her things down, he said. The stuff that happened. So she wouldn't feel like she missed everything. I know. That was your idea. I didn't want her to feel like, he stopped. Started again. Like the world just went on without her. William put his hand on the back of his son's neck. Lightly. The way his own father had never quite managed. That was the right thing to do, he said. George didn't answer. He walked into the room. William stayed in the doorway for a moment longer. He watched George sit on the far side of the bed and pull a folded paper from inside his jacket carefully, with both hands, and present it to his mother. He watched Catherine take it with the same careful deliberateness. He watched her begin to read and watched George watching her read, his expression performing casualness with only partial success. Louis was explaining something about the car journey to Charlotte, who was listening with the patient tolerance of someone who loved her brother completely and found him genuinely exhausting. Catherine looked up from George's paper and found William's eyes across the room. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. He pressed his fingers briefly to his mouth. She pressed hers back. It was the smallest possible thing. It cost both of them nothing and everything. He walked into the room. The door swung softly closed behind him. And the 5 of them were in there together, in that over-conditioned quiet, and it was nothing like home. It was enough. An hour passed without anyone tracking it. This was unusual. William had been living in track time for weeks, the 15-minute update intervals, the consultation windows, the logistics of 3 children's schedules running without one of their 2 architects, and the hour disappearing without his notice was something he only realized after the fact, when he looked at his watch and, then, back at the room and understood that something in him had simply let go of the clock for 60 minutes. Louis had fallen asleep. This happened sometimes with Louis. He simply ran out, mid-conversation, mid-sentence, like a torch left on too long, and went horizontal wherever he happened to be. He was now curled at the foot of Catherine's bed with his knees drawn up, his shoes still on, entirely unconscious and deeply unapologetic about it. Catherine had her hand resting on his ankle. Not doing anything with it. Just resting it there. A point of contact. Charlotte had migrated to the armchair with her book. She'd brought a book. She always brought a book. She'd been bringing books places since she was old enough to carry them, but she wasn't reading it. She was sitting with it open in her lap, watching her mother and brother with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and not entirely succeeding. George had his paper out. He was adding things to it. William watched him write something, pause, cross it out, write something else. What are you adding? Catherine asked. The beetle, George said without looking up. Louis found a beetle. Catherine smiled. He told me. It's important context. It absolutely is. There was a knock at the door, the nurse with the afternoon check, brisk and kind, the particular efficiency of someone who had learned to move through rooms where emotions were running without disturbing the surface of them. She did her checks. She said the things she was supposed to say. She left. The room resettled. Catherine had tired a little. William could see it in the set of her shoulders, in the way she was leaning back slightly more than she had been an hour ago. She was fighting it. He knew that quality of fighting, the precise, invisible effort of refusing to let the body's needs override the moment. He should probably start moving them toward leaving. He didn't. "Tell me something," Catherine said. She was looking at the ceiling, her hand still on Louis's ankle. The afternoon light had moved while they weren't watching and was now coming through the blinds at a lower angle, striping the floor in pale January gold. "What do you want to know?" William asked. "Something I missed. Something real." Not, she shifted carefully, not the formal version. Not the curated version. Something that actually happened. He thought about it. "George ate an entire jar of peanut butter with a spoon," he said. "Standing in front of the open fridge. At 11 at night. I came down for water and he just looked at me. Didn't stop. Just made eye contact and kept going." George looked up from his paper. "I was hungry. You were insatiable. There's a difference." Catherine laughed, the careful version, the one she'd learned to do since the surgery that kept the muscles from pulling, and the sound of it was so ordinary, so specifically hers, that William felt something in his chest do something he was going to have to deal with later in private. "Charlotte," Catherine said. "What did I miss?" Charlotte put down her book. She thought about this with the seriousness she applied to most things. "We rearranged the living room," she said. "I heard. Daddy did it wrong the first time." "I did not. You put the sofa where the light's wrong," Charlotte said, with the calm certainty of someone who has been right about this for some time. "It's better now. I fixed it." "She's right," George said, without looking up. "Thank you, George," Charlotte said. "You're welcome." William looked at the ceiling. "I want to be clear for the record that the sofa was perfectly placed." "It wasn't," said three voices in varying stages of wakefulness, Charlotte and George immediately, and then Louis, who had apparently not been as asleep as he appeared, contributing a drowsy but committed note from the foot of the bed without opening his eyes. Catherine looked at William. Her eyes were bright. That particular brightness, not happy bright, not the performed brightness of someone reassuring you, but the real kind. The kind that meant she was fully here, in this room, in this ridiculous and specific family, in this one Wednesday that had no business being as good as it was. "I missed you," he said. He hadn't meant to say it out loud. "I know," she said. "I could tell." "How?" "Because you came on Wednesday." He didn't have an answer for that. They left as the light was going. Louis had to be woken, which required a process. Charlotte put on her coat with the neat precision of someone who had accepted that the exit would take longer than it should and had made peace with that. George folded his paper and put it back in his pocket, the original one, William noticed, not the additions. He left the additions on the bedside table. Catherine saw him do it. She didn't say anything. Just watched him. At the door, each of the children said their version of goodbye. Louis's was lengthy and involved a final update on the Beatles' likely state of mind. Charlotte's was a careful hug, a long one, her face turned into Catherine's shoulder. George's was brief and looked nothing like how much it cost him. He kissed her cheek, said "We'll come back soon," and walked into the corridor, and Catherine watched him go with an expression she smoothed away before he could turn back and see it. William was last. He stood at the bedside and looked at his wife for a moment, not performing anything, not managing anything, just looking at her in the quiet of the room with the children in the corridor and the monitors humming and the light almost gone from the window. "George's list," he said. "I'll keep it." "I know you will." He leaned down and kissed her carefully, because of the various angles that required consideration, and she put her hand against his face, her thumb at his jaw, and held it there for a second longer than the goodbye required. "I'll call you tonight," he said. "I know," she said. "I'll be awake." "You should sleep." "I'll be awake," she said again. He straightened. Picked up his coat. Looked at her once more from the door. She was already watching him. She'd been watching him. "Go," she said softly. "Take them home." In the car, the dark came fast the way it does in January, not gradually, not as a transition, just suddenly, thick and present like it had been waiting. Louis was asleep before they hit the main road. Charlotte had her book out, but the light was too low now and she wasn't reading, just holding it. George had his earphones in. William drove. At a red light, George took one earphone out. "She looked better than I thought," he said. "She's getting stronger," William said. She laughed. "She did. She didn't fake it." William looked at his son in the rearview mirror, his serious, ancient-eyed, 11-year-old son. "No," he said. "She didn't fake it." George put the earphone back in. Looked out the window. Charlotte turned a page she hadn't read. Louis, in the dark of the back seat, still had one hand loosely fisted around nothing. The road was long and familiar and the frost was coming back and, somewhere in a room they were driving away from, a woman was holding a piece of paper with a list of small things on it, reading about the peanut butter and the beetle and the sofa that had been in the wrong place, the ordinary debris of the day she had missed, and, outside William's window the first stars were appearing in the winter sky, cold and very far away and entirely indifferent to any of it. He drove home. The children slept. That was enough. That was everything.